Have you ever wondered if a few lines of poetry could save a company worth millions? If somewhere in the fields and farmlands of America, a shy young woman might hold the exact solution that a desperate CEO needs to prevent his empire from crumbling? This is the story of Rebecca Martinez, a quiet farm girl from rural Nebraska, and David Chen, a former Marine who built a tech empire only to watch it collapse until a handwritten poem on weathered notebook paper revealed that. Sometimes the most profound business strategies come wrapped in the simplest words. It was a Tuesday morning in late September, when the autumn chill seemed to penetrate not just the glass walls of Chen Technologies headquarters in downtown Omaha, but the very foundation of everything David Chen had spent 15 years building. At 48, David pushed through the revolving doors of his corner office on the 32nd floor, carrying more than just his military-issued tactical briefcase that he'd kept from his Marine days. He carried the crushing weight of a technology company hemorrhaging money, losing clients, and facing what industry analysts were calling an inevitable collapse. The financial reports spread across his mahogany desk told a story that made even his combat-hardened stomach turn. Chen Technologies, once the Midwest's most promising agricultural technology firm, had seen their revolutionary farm management software lose 60% of its user base in 18 months. The product that was supposed to revolutionize how small and medium-sized farms manage their operations, track their crops, and optimize their yields had become a technological nightmare that farmers couldn't understand, couldn't afford, and couldn't trust. David stared at the quarterly projections, his jaw clenched in the same way it had been during his 3 tours in Afghanistan, when incoming mortar fire forced his unit to take cover. The board of directors had scheduled what they diplomatically termed a strategic realignment meeting for Thursday morning, but David knew corporate speak when he heard it. They were preparing to vote him out as CEO, dissolve the company, and sell off the assets to the highest bidder. 15 years of building something meaningful, something that was supposed to help the farming families he'd grown up around, was about to disappear because he'd lost touch with the very people he'd set out to serve. The irony wasn't lost on him that a company designed to help farmers had become so complicated, so over-engineered, and so disconnected from actual agricultural needs that the people it was meant to support had abandoned it in droves. David had assembled teams of brilliant software engineers, sophisticated user experience designers, and data scientists with advanced degrees from prestigious universities. But somehow, in all their technological sophistication, they had created a product that treated farming like a mathematical equation rather than the complex, intuitive, relationship-based work that it actually was. As David settled into his leather chair, overwhelmed by market analysis reports and investor confidence surveys that painted an increasingly bleak picture, he almost missed it. There, placed carefully next to his computer monitor, was a single sheet of paper that definitely hadn't been there when he'd left the office the night before. But this wasn't a memo from his assistant about emergency board meetings or a legal document from the company's lawyers about bankruptcy procedures. The paper was different, cream-colored, slightly rough to the touch, the kind of stationery that suggested it had been carefully chosen rather than grabbed from an office supply closet. As David leaned closer, his morning coffee growing cold in his hand, he saw handwriting that was unmistakably personal, written with the kind of careful attention that comes from someone who rarely puts their thoughts on paper for others to see. Words at the top of the page made his pulse quicken. For the Marine who taught us that real strength comes from understanding the mission from the ground up. Below that simple dedication, written in the same careful script, was a poem that would begin to unravel everything David thought he knew about leadership, technology, and the profound wisdom that can emerge from the most unexpected places. Poem began with lines that seemed to speak directly to his current crisis. In fields where ancient wisdom grows, beneath the soil that few folks know, there lies a truth both deep and plain. The best solutions ease the pain. David found himself reading and rereading these opening verses, something stirring in his memory like a half-remembered melody from years past. The language was simple, almost childlike in its directness, but the meaning seemed to cut straight through all the complex business, theories and technological solutions that had been failing him for months. As he continued reading, David realized this wasn't just poetry, it was a systematic breakdown of everything that was wrong with his company's approach to serving agricultural customers. But it was written in metaphors so elegant and insights so profound that he found himself reaching for a pen to take notes, something he hadn't done since his early days as a lieutenant, when he was still learning how to translate military strategy into practical action. The farmer knows his soil by touch, not graphs that promise far too much. He reads the sky with weathered eyes, not data streams that analyze. The verses continued with observations that seemed to pierce through every mistaken assumption his development team had made about how farmers actually worked, how they made decisions, and what kind of technology would actually help them rather than complicate their already demanding lives. David's hands began to tremble as he read further into the poem, recognizing descriptions of agricultural challenges that his expensive market research had completely missed. Solutions expressed in simple language that his team of experts had overcomplicated beyond recognition. Whoever had written this understood farming not from spreadsheets and focus groups, but from the inside out, from the perspective of someone who had lived the daily realities that his software was supposed to support. But what struck him most profoundly was the military precision hidden within the pastoral imagery. The poem was structured like a tactical assessment he might have written during his Marine years, identifying the mission, understanding the terrain, recognizing the resources available, and developing a strategy that worked with natural conditions rather than against them. The author had somehow translated agricultural wisdom into the kind of systematic thinking that David recognized from his military training, but had lost sight of in the corporate complexity that had gradually consumed his company. At the bottom of the page, signed in the same careful handwriting, were the initials RM. And beneath that, a small drawing of a corn stalk with roots that extended deep into the soil. The image was simple but precise, drawn by someone who had clearly observed corn plants with the kind of attention that comes from understanding their growth patterns, their needs, and their relationship to the earth that sustained them. David sat back in his chair, the poem still in his hands, feeling something he hadn't experienced since his early days of building the company, the sense that someone understood not just what he was trying to accomplish, but why it mattered. This wasn't feedback from a consultant who had been paid to analyze his business model, or advice from a board member who understood finance but had never set foot on a working farm. This was insight from someone who had lived the life his technology was supposed to improve. But as David studied the initials and the careful drawing, he realized something even more unsettling. The perspective in this poem wasn't just agricultural, it was personal. The verses seemed to know things about his own background, his own motivations for starting the company, his own connections to farming communities that he rarely discussed in corporate settings. Whoever had written this understood that his commitment to agricultural technology wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal, rooted in experiences and relationships that had shaped his sense of purpose long before he'd ever learned about software development or business strategy. The poem concluded with lines that seemed to speak directly to his current crisis and his future choices. The soldier knows that victory comes not from the loudest battle drums, but from the quiet, steady hands that truly understand the land. Listen close to those who know the secrets that make gardens grow. Their wisdom, simple though it seems, can build the strongest, truest dreams. David found himself reading these final verses over and over, recognizing both a challenge and an invitation. Someone was telling him that the solutions he needed weren't going to come from more sophisticated technology or more aggressive marketing strategies, but from reconnecting with the fundamental understanding of agriculture that had inspired him. to start the company in the first place. But they were also suggesting that the wisdom he needed was closer than he thought, perhaps already within his organization, waiting to be recognized and valued. As he sat alone in his office with the morning sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, David realized that this poem had accomplished something that months of consultant reports and board meetings had failed to achieve. It had reminded him why he had risked everything to build this company, what his original mission had been, and how far he had strayed from the values and insights that had given his work meaning in the first place. But the poem had also created a mystery that David knew he couldn't ignore. Someone in his organization, someone with access to his office, understood both his background and his current challenges well enough to offer guidance that cut straight to the heart of what needed to change. Someone was watching, understanding, and caring enough to take the risk of offering help in a way that was both personal and professional, both gentle and powerfully direct. David carefully folded the poem and placed it in his shirt pocket, close to his heart, the way he used to carry letters from home during his deployments. He had no idea that 4 floors below, in Chen Technologies' customer service department, someone was watching the building's security cameras, waiting to see if her message had reached its intended destination. Someone who had been preparing for this moment, not for months, but for 15 careful years, ever since a young Marine had spoken at her high school graduation and changed the entire trajectory of her quiet, determined life. Rebecca Martinez had perfected the art of meaningful invisibility during her 3 years at Chen Technologies. At 24, she moved through the customer service department like a gentle current in a stream, always present, always helpful, but rarely drawing attention to herself. Her desk sat in the corner of the open floor plan, positioned perfectly to observe the natural flow of the office while remaining just outside the spotlight that seemed to follow the more outgoing members of her team. If you looked carefully at Rebecca's workspace, really examined it with the attention she gave to everything around her, you might notice details that revealed far more than her official job title suggested. The small mason jar filled with wildflowers that she changed weekly, always species native to Nebraska that most city dwellers wouldn't recognize. The hand-carved wooden pen holder that her grandfather had made from oak grown on their family farm, worn smooth by decades of use. The collection of agricultural journals stacked neatly beside her computer monitor, publications that seemed oddly sophisticated for someone whose primary responsibility was answering customer support calls, what none of her colleagues knew. Not even her direct supervisor, Maria Santos, who genuinely appreciated Rebecca's quiet competence, was that for the past 18 months, Rebecca had been Chen Technologies' most valuable uncredited contributor. The company maintained an internal system for tracking customer complaints and feedback, a digital repository where support staff could log recurring issues and suggest potential improvements. Most entries were straightforward, technical reports or requests for software updates that might reduce call volume, but someone had been submitting observations that were fundamentally different from the routine feedback that filled the system. These submissions came with detailed analysis of customer communication patterns, insights into the underlying agricultural challenges that drove support requests, and recommendations that demonstrated an unusual combination of technological understanding and deep farming experience. Each suggestion was accompanied by careful documentation of customer conversations, analysis of seasonal patterns and technical difficulties, and proposed solutions that address not just immediate software problems, but the broader disconnect between the technology and its intended users. The submissions were signed simply with the letter R and included references to farming practices, seasonal rhythms, and agricultural wisdom that seemed far beyond what anyone would expect from a customer service representative. What made these contributions even more remarkable was their consistency. They arrived regularly. They addressed systemic issues rather than surface-level problems, and they demonstrated the kind of holistic thinking that expensive consulting Firms were paid thousands of dollars to provide. Tommy Chen, the lead customer service manager and David's younger brother, had been quietly implementing many of these suggestions for months. The improvements had been subtle, but significant customer satisfaction scores had increased by 28%. The average call resolution time had decreased by 15 minutes, and most importantly, the tone of customer interactions had shifted from frustration to something approaching gratitude. But Tommy had no idea who R was, and his attempts to identify the contributor through the internal system had been unsuccessful. What Tommy didn't understand was that each suggestion came from someone who had been listening to customer calls with the ears of someone who had lived the agricultural challenges that Chen Technologies was supposed to address. Rebecca had grown up on a family farm 40 miles outside of Omaha, where her grandparents had taught her to read weather patterns, soil conditions, and crop needs with the same intuitive precision that other people brought to reading facial expressions or social situations. Every frustrated call from a farmer struggling with the software's complex interface reminded Rebecca of her own grandfather's battles with technology that promised to help but seemed designed by people who had never spent a dawn checking irrigation lines or an evening calculating feed ratios. Every complaint about features that didn't match actual farming workflows brought back memories of her family's kitchen table conversations about the gap between what agricultural technology companies claimed their products could do and what farmers actually needed them to accomplish. Rebecca had taken the job at Chen Technologies immediately after graduating from the University of Nebraska with a degree in agricultural communications, a program that had taught her to translate complex farming concepts into language that non-agricultural audiences could understand. But she had also chosen the position because she recognized David Chen's name from a presentation he had given at her high school graduation 15 years earlier, when she was a shy 18-year-old who had no idea that a former Marine's words about service and understanding would fundamentally shape her approach to both education and career. David's graduation speech had been different from the typical motivational presentations that seniors usually received. Instead of talking about following dreams or achieving personal success, he had spoken about the responsibility that comes with understanding how people who bridge different worlds, who can translate between different ways of knowing, have an obligation to use that ability in service of something larger than themselves. He had talked about his own transition from military service to agricultural technology, explaining how his Marine training had taught him that the most effective solutions come from understanding problems from the perspective of the people who live with them every day. That speech had inspired Rebecca to study agricultural communications, but it had also planted a deeper seed about the value of quiet observation and careful translation between different kinds of expertise. When she had seen the job posting at Chen Technologies 3 years later, she had recognized an opportunity not just for employment, but for the kind of service that David had described in his presentation, using her ability to understand both farming and technology to help bridge the gap between what the company was trying to create and what farmers actually needed. But Rebecca had also recognized that her insights would be more valuable if they came from careful observation rather than assumptions about her background or education. She had deliberately chosen to work in customer service rather than product development, knowing that direct contact with frustrated users would give her the kind of real-world feedback that development teams often missed. She had intentionally kept her agricultural background private, allowing her recommendations to be evaluated based on their merit rather than her credentials. What had surprised Rebecca was how quickly she had recognized the fundamental problems with Chen Technologies' approach to agricultural software. The development team, despite their technical sophistication, had created a product that reflected urban assumptions about how farming worked rather than the complex, intuitive, relationship-based reality of agricultural decision-making. The software assumed that farmers wanted to manage their operations like manufacturing processes, with standardized inputs and predictable outputs, rather than acknowledging that successful farming requires constant adaptation to variables that can't be controlled or completely predicted. Rebecca had spent months listening to customer calls where experienced farmers described feeling stupid or inadequate because they couldn't navigate software that was supposed to make their work easier. She had heard the frustration in voices of people who understood soil, weather, and crop management with decades of hard-won expertise, but felt defeated by interfaces designed by people who understood code, but had never spent a season watching plants respond to changes in rainfall, temperature, or soil conditions. Each of her suggestions to the internal feedback system had been carefully crafted to address these fundamental misunderstandings, without revealing the depth of her agricultural knowledge or her growing concern about the company's direction. She had learned to frame her observations in terms of customer service efficiency and user experience improvement, languages that would resonate with managers who measured success in metrics rather than the more subtle indicators of whether technology was actually serving its intended purpose. But as the months had passed, and she had watched the company's financial situation deteriorate despite the incremental improvements her suggestions had helped implement, Rebecca had realized that more dramatic intervention might be necessary. The customer service improvements had made individual interactions more positive, but they hadn't addressed the deeper philosophical problems with how the company understood its mission and its customers. Rebecca had been working late the previous Monday evening, staying after hours to review the quarterly customer feedback reports that would be presented to the board later that week. The data painted a picture that she knew would be devastating for David and the company. Despite technical improvements and better customer service, overall user retention continued to decline because the fundamental product still didn't match what farmers actually needed or wanted. As she had walked past David's office on her way to the elevator, she had seen him through the glass walls, sitting alone at his desk with his head in his hands, surrounded by financial reports and strategic planning documents. The image had reminded her powerfully of her grandfather during the farm crisis of the 1980s, when external economic forces had threatened everything her family had built, and traditional approaches to farming had suddenly seemed inadequate to meet new challenges. That night, Rebecca had sat at her kitchen table in the small apartment she rented near downtown Omaha. Surrounded by the agricultural journals she read to stay connected to farming innovations and the poetry notebook she had kept since high school as a way of processing observations and emotions too complex for ordinary conversation, she had realized that her careful, incremental approach to helping Chen Technologies might not be sufficient to address the scope of the crisis the company was facing. David's graduation speech 15 years earlier had talked about the obligation that comes with understanding, about the responsibility to translate insights across different worlds when that translation might serve something important. Rebecca had recognized that her combination of agricultural knowledge, customer service experience, and poetic ability to distill complex ideas into clear, memorable language might allow her to offer exactly the kind of perspective that David needed but wasn't receiving from traditional business advisors or technical consultants. The poem she had spent the entire night writing wasn't just literary expression, it was strategic communication designed to remind David of his original mission while providing a systematic analysis of what needed to change. Every metaphor had been chosen to translate agricultural wisdom into language that would resonate with his military background and business training. Every verse had been crafted to address specific problems she had identified through months of customer interactions while remaining accessible and personally meaningful. Rebecca had delivered the poem to David's office early Tuesday morning, arriving before dawn to ensure that she could place it on his desk without being observed. She had used the security access that came with her customer service position to enter the executive floor, her heart pounding with the recognition that she was taking a risk that could cost her job but might also provide the intervention that could save not just the company, but its original mission of serving agricultural communities. Now, as she sat at her customer service desk on Tuesday afternoon, answering calls from farmers who continued to struggle with software that didn't understand their needs, Rebecca found herself monitoring the building's internal directory system and watching the elevator indicators that would tell her whether David had returned to his office after his morning meetings. She had no way of knowing whether he had found the poem, whether he had read it, or whether her attempt at communication had been dismissed as inappropriate or irrelevant. But Rebecca also knew that she had done what David's graduation speech had challenged her to do 15 years earlier. She had used her unique position and understanding to serve something larger than herself, even if that service required risk and vulnerability that felt almost overwhelming for someone who had spent years perfecting the art of helpful invisibility. By Wednesday morning, David had made a decision that would have surprised anyone who knew the methodical, data-driven CEO he had become since transitioning from military service to corporate leadership. Instead of assigning the mystery of the poem to his security team or asking his assistant to investigate who had access to his office, he chose to pursue the matter personally. Something about the verses had stirred memories and instincts that felt more important than protocol, more urgent than the standard procedures that typically governed his interactions with employees. His first conversation was with Tommy Chen, his younger brother who managed the customer service department with the same attention to detail that had made him an exceptional logistics coordinator during his own abbreviated military service. Tommy's morning report, delivered in the conference room adjacent to David's office, contained information that opened a door to discoveries far more significant than a single anonymous poem. The customer satisfaction metrics continue to improve, Tommy said, pulling up performance data on the large monitor that dominated the conference room's east wall. We're seeing a 32% improvement in call resolution satisfaction over the past 18 months. And our average customer retention conversations have shifted from defensive to collaborative. The change has been gradual but consistent. David leaned forward, studying charts that showed trends he hadn't noticed when examining broader company performance data. What's driving these improvements? Have we implemented new training protocols or customer service software? Tommy shook his head, scrolling through additional reports that showed patterns of incremental but meaningful change across multiple metrics. That's what's interesting about this data. The improvements seem to be coming from suggestions submitted through our internal feedback system, but they're not coming from management initiatives or formal training programs. Someone on our team has been identifying systemic issues and proposing solutions that address underlying problems rather than surface-level symptoms. The mention of systematic analysis and underlying problems made David's pulse quicken, echoing language and concepts from the poem that had occupied his thoughts since the previous morning. Can you show me these suggestions? Tommy opened the internal feedback portal, navigating to a section that David rarely examined during his reviews of departmental performance. The screen filled with entries that immediately captured David's attention, not because of their technical sophistication, but because of their approach to understanding customer needs and agricultural challenges. These submissions are different from typical feedback, Tommy continued, highlighting entries that demonstrated unusual depth and insight. Most customer service suggestions focus on reducing call times or improving script efficiency. But these recommendations address fundamental disconnects between our software design and actual farming practices. They include analysis of seasonal patterns and customer frustration, documentation of recurring problems that suggest interface design issues, and proposed solutions that show understanding of both technology and agriculture. David studied the entries, recognizing analytical approaches that reminded him of tactical assessments he had written during his Marine years: systematic identification of problems, comprehensive understanding of environmental factors, and strategic thinking about sustainable solutions rather than temporary fixes. But more than the methodology, he recognized perspectives and insights that echoed themes from the poem, observations about farming that came from lived experience rather than market research. The suggestions are signed with just the letter R. Tommy said, pointing to the consistent signature that appeared on the most insightful submissions. I've been implementing many of these recommendations because they consistently prove effective, but I haven't been able to identify who's submitting them. The system allows anonymous contributions, and IT security has confirmed that all submissions come through proper employee channels. David felt pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to align in ways that suggested connections he hadn't anticipated. Tommy, this person, their suggestions focus specifically on agricultural challenges and farming practices? Exclusively, Tommy replied, opening several representative examples that demonstrated the pattern David was beginning to recognize. But they're not just identifying problems. These submissions show understanding of farming that goes beyond what we'd expect from customer service training. They reference seasonal workflows, equipment maintenance schedules, soil management practices, and crop rotation planning agricultural knowledge that suggests personal experience rather than academic study. The specificity of agricultural references made David think immediately of the poem's detailed understanding of farming practices, its integration of agricultural wisdom with strategic thinking, and its ability to translate complex farming concepts into language that resonated with his military background. The parallels were too significant to be coincidental. I'd like to review these submissions in detail, David said, recognizing that his investigation into the poem's authorship might lead to discoveries about ongoing contributions that had been improving the company's performance without his knowledge. Can you provide access to the complete submission history? As Tommy prepared to transfer the files, the conference room door opened to admit Alina Vasquez, the building's facilities coordinator who had worked for the Chen Technologies property management company since before David's company had moved into the current headquarters 5 years earlier. At 62, Elena possessed the kind of institutional memory that came from observing office dynamics and employee interactions across multiple organizations and management changes. "Excuse me, Mr. David," Elena said quietly, carrying herself with the dignified presence that made both executives and entry-level employees feel equally comfortable seeking her assistance. "I couldn't help overhearing discussion about mysterious contributions to company improvement. Would you mind if someone with a different perspective shared an observation?" David gestured for Elena to join the conversation, recognizing that her unique position gave her insights into employee behavior and organizational dynamics that management often missed. Elena had the rare ability to notice patterns and connections that escaped people who were focused on specific departmental responsibilities. 5 years ago, when your company first moved into this building, Elena began, settling into a chair with the careful attention of someone who had spent decades observing workplace interactions. There was a young woman who started in customer service who was different from most new employees. Quiet, but not shy exactly. Observant in ways that suggested she was processing information most people don't notice. David felt his attention sharpen, sensing that Elena's observations might provide crucial context for understanding both the poem and the anonymous feedback submissions that had been improving customer service performance. "This employee," Elena continued, "always arrived early and stayed late, but not in the way that suggests someone trying to impress supervisors. More like someone who genuinely cared about the work itself. She spent lunch breaks reading agricultural publications rather than socializing, and she had conversations with customers that lasted longer than typical support calls, but resulted in higher satisfaction ratings." Tommy looked up from the computer where he had been reviewing the anonymous submissions. "Are you talking about someone specific?" Elena nodded, her expression thoughtful but certain. Rebecca Martinez. She's been in your customer service department for 3 years now. Works at the corner desk with the wildflowers and agricultural journals. Most people don't notice her because she's perfected the art of being helpful without drawing attention to herself. The name Rebecca Martinez meant nothing to David immediately, but the description of someone who combined agricultural knowledge with customer service excellence while maintaining deliberate invisibility matched the profile he was developing of the person who might have written both the poem and the anonymous feedback submissions. "Elena," David said, keeping his voice carefully neutral. "This employee's background. Do you know anything about her experience with farming or agriculture?" "That's what makes her interesting," Elena replied, settling more comfortably into her chair as if preparing to share observations she had been collecting for years. Rebecca grew up on a family farm about 40 miles west of here. Her grandparents still operate it, though she doesn't talk about her agricultural background much at work. But if you pay attention to her conversations with customers, especially farmers who are frustrated with technical issues, she has ways of explaining things that suggest she understands farming from the inside out. David exchanged glances with Tommy, both of them recognizing that Elena's description aligned perfectly with the profile of someone who could have written the insightful feedback submissions and the poem that had challenged his thinking about the company's direction. "There's something else," Elena continued, her voice taking on the careful tone of someone sharing information that might be sensitive. "About 15 years ago, Rebecca was a senior at Westfield High School when you gave their graduation speech. I know this because my niece was in that same graduating class, and she mentioned that one of her classmates, a quiet girl who was planning to study agriculture, had been particularly affected by your presentation about service and understanding different perspectives." The mention of his graduation speech 15 years earlier sent a chill of recognition through David's entire body. He remembered that presentation clearly, one of his first attempts to articulate what he had learned about leadership during his military service and how those lessons might apply to civilian challenges, particularly the work of bridging different communities and ways of understanding. "Elena," David said, his voice barely steady, "this employee, Rebecca, you think she might have been influenced by that speech?" "I think," Elena said gently, "that young woman took your words about using understanding to serve something larger than yourself very seriously. And I think she's been applying those lessons in ways that most people wouldn't recognize, because she does her most important work quietly." Tommy stared at the computer screen where the anonymous submissions were still displayed, his expression shifting from curiosity to something approaching awe. "You think Rebecca Martinez has been that she's been submitting all these insights about improving our customer service and our understanding of agricultural customers?" Elena smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had been observing patterns that others had missed. "I think Rebecca Martinez understands both farming and technology in ways that could help this company remember what it was originally supposed to accomplish. And I think she's been trying to help for a long time, just not in ways that draw attention to herself." David felt the final pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with a clarity that was both exhilarating and humbling. The poem that had challenged his thinking about the company's direction, the anonymous feedback that had been improving customer service, and the long-term strategic insights that had been appearing in the internal system all came from the same source: a former student who had taken his graduation speech about service and understanding and spent 15 years developing the expertise to help him solve problems he hadn't even recognized. "I need to talk to her," David said, recognizing that this conversation would require the same careful balance of acknowledgement and respect that had characterized the most important communications during his military service. "But I want to approach this in a way that honors her contributions without making her feel exposed or pressured." Elena nodded approvingly. "Rebecca's contributions have been effective precisely because she's been allowed to work according to her natural strengths. She observes, she understands, and she helps, but she does it all in ways that feel safe and sustainable for her. Tommy closed the feedback system and turned to face David directly. If Rebecca has been providing all these insights while working in customer service, what does that say about how we've been approaching product development and customer understanding? David recognized the deeper implications of what they had discovered. Rebecca's success in improving customer satisfaction and providing strategic insights while working outside the formal development process suggested that the company's traditional approaches to innovation and customer understanding had been missing crucial perspectives and methods. "It says," David replied, feeling the weight of leadership decisions that would affect not just Rebecca's future, but the company's ability to fulfill its original mission, that we need to fundamentally reconsider how we identify expertise, how we value different kinds of knowledge, and how we create space for the insights that can truly transform what we're trying to accomplish. Tomorrow, David would walk down to the customer service department and acknowledge a connection that had been growing stronger for 15 years, even when neither of them had realized the other was still carrying lessons from a graduation speech that had planted seeds neither of them had forgotten. 15 years earlier, David Chun had been a very different man, carrying different responsibilities and driven by motivations that seemed both simpler and more complex than the corporate challenges that now consumed his days. At 33, he had recently completed his final tour of duty as a Marine Corps captain in Afghanistan, where he had spent 3 years leading logistics operations that kept remote forward operating bases supplied with everything from ammunition to medical supplies to the kind of specialized equipment that could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The transition from military service to civilian life had been more jarring than David had anticipated. The structured purpose of military operations, where every decision carried clear consequences and every team member understood their role in larger strategic objectives, had been replaced by a civilian world that often seemed to lack both clarity and urgency about what truly mattered. David had found himself struggling to identify work that felt worthy of the intensity and commitment that military service had taught him to bring to everything he considered important. But during his final months of active duty, David had been assigned to a special project that would fundamentally reshape his understanding of how military principles could be applied to civilian challenges. The Department of Defense had partnered with the Department of Agriculture to develop technology solutions that could help veterans transition into agricultural careers, recognizing that many service members came from rural backgrounds and possessed logistical and management skills that could be valuable in modern farming operations. The project had required David to spend 6 months working directly with farming families throughout Nebraska, Iowa, and Kansas, learning how agricultural operations actually functioned and identifying where military-style systematic thinking might improve efficiency without disrupting the intuitive, relationship-based approaches that made farming successful. For the first time since joining the Marines, David had found himself in the role of student rather than leader, learning from civilian experts who understood challenges and solutions that weren't covered in any military manual. The experience had been transformative in ways that David hadn't expected. The farming families he worked with possessed the same dedication to mission success that he recognized from his best military colleagues, but they applied that dedication to challenges that required different kinds of courage and different kinds of strategic thinking. They dealt with variables that couldn't be controlled through superior firepower or technological advantage, weather, market fluctuations, soil conditions, and equipment failures that demanded adaptive problem-solving rather than predetermined responses. More importantly, David had discovered that many of the farmers he worked with possessed analytical and management skills that would have impressed any military logistics coordinator, but they had learned to apply those skills in ways that honored relationships, community connections, and long-term sustainability rather than short-term tactical victories. They understood that successful operations required not just technical competence, but the ability to work with natural systems, local communities, and multi-generational knowledge that couldn't be reduced to standardized procedures. The project had concluded with David spending 2 weeks visiting high schools in rural communities, speaking to graduating seniors about opportunities in agricultural technology and the ways that military service skills could contribute to civilian work that served essential community needs. The presentations were part recruitment effort and part educational outreach, designed to help young people understand career paths that combine technological innovation with agricultural service. David had approached these presentations with the same preparation and attention to detail that he brought to military briefings, but he had also recognized that high school audiences required different communication strategies than seasoned Marines. He needed to convey complex ideas about service, purpose, and career development in language that would resonate with 18-year-olds who were facing decisions about college, military service, and their place in rapidly changing economic and technological landscapes. The graduation speech at Westfield High School had been scheduled for a Thursday evening in late May, when the agricultural communities surrounding Omaha were deep into spring planting season and the rhythm of farm work created a backdrop that reminded David of the integration between civilian and agricultural life that his project had been designed to support. The high school's gymnasium had been filled with families whose lives were directly connected to farming, either through their own operations or through the network of businesses and services that supported agricultural communities. David had prepared his presentation carefully, focusing on themes that he hoped would resonate with young people who were growing up in rural communities, but might not recognize the value and sophistication of the agricultural knowledge they had inherited. He wanted to communicate that the skills they had learned from family farming, systematic thinking, adaptive problem-solving, long-term planning, and the ability to work with complex, unpredictable systems were exactly the kinds of capabilities that would be essential for addressing technological and social challenges in the decades ahead. But as David had looked out at the audience of graduating seniors, he had recognized something that changed his approach to the entire presentation. Many of the students seemed to view their agricultural backgrounds as limitations rather than advantages, assumptions they needed to overcome rather than foundations they could build upon. They had internalized messages from broader cultural narratives that suggested rural knowledge was somehow less sophisticated or less valuable than urban expertise. That success required leaving their communities rather than finding ways to contribute to them. Tonight I want to talk to you about a different kind of service. David had begun, abandoning the formal script he had prepared in favor of a more personal and direct approach. Not just military service, though that's one important path, but the service that comes from understanding, from becoming the kind of person who can translate between different worlds and different ways of knowing. He had talked about his own journey from rural Nebraska to military service and back to agricultural technology, describing how each environment had taught him different lessons about leadership, problem solving, and the importance of working with rather than against the natural characteristics of the systems you're trying to improve. But more importantly, he had tried to help the students understand that their agricultural backgrounds gave them insights and capabilities that couldn't be learned in classrooms or corporate training programs. The most effective leaders I've served with, David had continued, are people who can understand challenges from multiple perspectives, who can communicate across different kinds of expertise, and who recognize that the best solutions usually come from combining different approaches rather than imposing a single method. He had described military operations where success had depended on understanding local conditions, cultural dynamics, and resource limitations that required adapting sophisticated strategies to specific environmental realities. Many of you have grown up learning exactly these kinds of skills, he had told the assembled seniors. You understand how to read systems that can't be completely controlled, how to make decisions with incomplete information, how to work with natural processes rather than against them. You know how to maintain equipment, manage resources, and coordinate complex operations where timing and attention to detail can determine success or failure. David had paused in his presentation, looking out at faces that seemed to be processing ideas they hadn't considered before, recognizing capabilities they had developed without realizing their broader value. But here's the most important thing I want you to understand. You have an obligation that comes with this understanding. When you can bridge different worlds, when you understand both traditional agricultural wisdom and modern technological possibilities, both rural communities and urban opportunities, you have a responsibility to use that ability in service of something larger than your individual success. The gymnasium had grown quiet in a way that suggested genuine engagement rather than polite attention, and David had recognized that his message was resonating with students who were struggling to understand their place in a changing world. The technology sector, the agricultural industry, government agencies, educational institutions, all of these areas need people who can translate between different kinds of expertise, who can help organizations understand the real-world impact of their decisions, who can ensure that innovation serves the communities it's supposed to help rather than replacing them. David had concluded his presentation with a challenge that he hoped would plant seeds for future reflection and decision-making. Whatever path you choose, college, military service, returning to family operations, or pursuing careers that take you far from here, remember that your agricultural background isn't something to overcome or leave behind. It's a foundation for understanding how complex systems work, how to serve essential human needs, and how to approach challenges with both analytical thinking and deep respect for the wisdom that comes from experience. Look for opportunities to be bridges, he had urged them. Find ways to translate what you know about rural life, agricultural systems, and community relationships into contexts where that knowledge can help solve problems and serve people who need exactly the kind of understanding you've been developing your entire lives. As David had packed up his materials after the presentation, he had noticed a small group of students who had remained in the gymnasium, talking quietly among themselves about ideas from his speech. One student in particular had caught his attention, a young woman who had been sitting near the front, taking careful notes throughout his presentation with the kind of focused attention that suggested genuine engagement rather than academic obligation. She had approached him as he was preparing to leave, her manner shy but determined, carrying herself with the quiet confidence that David recognized in people who had learned to observe carefully before speaking. "Captain Chen," she had said, her voice soft but clear, "thank you for helping me understand that the things I love about farming might actually be valuable in other kinds of work too." "What aspects of farming do you love?" David had asked, recognizing something in her demeanor that suggested deeper thinking about agricultural and technological questions than most high school seniors would typically express. "I love that farming requires understanding so many different systems at once," she had replied, her words careful but passionate. "Weather, soil, plant biology, equipment maintenance, market timing, community relationships, and how all these systems affect each other in ways that you can't always predict, but you learn to work with through experience and observation." David had been struck by the sophistication of her analysis and the way she had immediately connected his presentation themes to her own understanding of agricultural complexity. That's exactly the kind of systems thinking that will be essential for addressing the challenges we're facing in agricultural technology, he had told her. People who understand farming from the inside out, but can also communicate that understanding to people who design technology or make policy decisions. "I'm planning to study agricultural communications in college," she had said, "but I wasn't sure if that was practical or if I should choose something more technical. Your speech made me think that maybe helping people understand each other across Different kinds of expertise could be just as important as developing new technology. David had recognized at that moment that his presentation had accomplished exactly what he had hoped, helping the young person understand that her agricultural background and communication interests could serve larger purposes than she had previously imagined. The most important technological advances come from people who can bridge different kinds of knowledge, he had assured her. Agricultural communications could position you to ensure that innovation actually serves farming communities, rather than just impressing other technologists. As David had driven away from Westfield High School that evening, he had carried with him the memory of that brief conversation and the recognition that his own future might lie in creating exactly the kind of bridge between military strategic thinking, technological innovation, and agricultural service that he had described in his presentation. That conversation, and others like it throughout his speaking tour, had planted the seeds for what would eventually become Chen Technologies and his commitment to developing technology that truly served agricultural communities. But David had also carried away something else from that evening, sensed that the real measure of his presentation's success wouldn't be immediate, but would reveal itself years later, in the choices that young people made about education, careers, and service as they developed their own understanding of how to use their capabilities in service of something larger than themselves. He had no idea that one shy young woman in the audience had taken his words about bridge building and service so seriously that she would spend the next 15 years developing exactly the kind of expertise and perspective that could help him solve challenges he couldn't yet imagine, or that her commitment to quiet service would eventually provide the insights he would need to save not just his company, but his original mission of serving agricultural communities through thoughtful technological innovation. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October clarity that made the Nebraska sky seem infinite, but David barely noticed the weather as he made his way through the familiar corridors of Chen Technologies toward a conversation that would either validate his growing suspicions or reveal that his investigation had led him down an elaborate path of coincidences. He had spent the previous evening reviewing every piece of evidence he had gathered: the poem, the anonymous feedback submissions, Elena's observations, and Tommy's documentation of customer service improvements, building a case that felt compelling, but remained circumstantial until he could confirm the connections through direct contact. The customer service department occupied the entire fourth floor of the building, an open workspace designed to facilitate collaboration while providing individual team members with enough privacy to handle sensitive customer conversations. As David stepped off the elevator, he was struck by the purposeful energy that characterized the department's daily operations, the sound of focused conversations, the steady rhythm of problem solving, and the underlying sense that meaningful work was being accomplished even when individual contributions weren't immediately visible. David moved through the workspace with deliberate calm, nodding to employees who recognized him, but trying not to disrupt the natural flow of work that made the department effective. He had learned during his military service that the most valuable observations often came from seeing operations in their normal state, rather than during formal inspections or special circumstances. The customer service team functioned with a collaborative efficiency that reminded him of well-coordinated military units where individual expertise served larger mission objectives. As he approached the corner of the floor where Elena had indicated Rebecca Martinez worked, David found himself observing details that he had missed during previous departmental visits. The workspace arrangement reflected both individual personality and professional competence, personal touches that created comfortable working environments without compromising the focus required for complex customer interactions. But one desk in particular stood out for its unique combination of professional efficiency and agricultural awareness. Rebecca's workspace occupied a corner position that provided natural light from two directions while offering a clear view of the department's daily activities. The desk itself was organized with the kind of systematic attention that David recognized from effective military logistics coordination. But the personal elements revealed interests and knowledge that extended far beyond typical customer service. Training. The small mason jar filled with native wildflowers, the hand-carved wooden accessories, and the collection of agricultural publications created an environment that integrated professional competence with deeper agricultural understanding. But what captured David's attention most powerfully was the evidence of work that went beyond standard customer service responsibilities. The notebook beside Rebecca's computer contained careful handwriting that he now recognized from the poem, but the content appeared to be systematic analysis of customer communication patterns, seasonal trends and technical difficulties, and observations about the relationship between agricultural practices and software design challenges. These weren't casual notes but comprehensive documentation that suggested months of careful observation and analysis. Rebecca was engaged in a phone conversation when David approached her desk, and he had the opportunity to observe her customer interaction skills before announcing his presence. Her voice carried the kind of patient competence that made complex technical explanations accessible without sounding condescending, and her questions demonstrated understanding of agricultural operations that went far beyond scripted customer service protocols. She was helping a farmer troubleshoot irrigation scheduling software, but her approach integrated technical instruction with practical agricultural knowledge in ways that addressed both immediate problems and underlying workflow challenges. Yes, sir, I understand that the spring planting schedule module isn't aligning with your soil moisture readings, Rebecca was saying, her tone conveying both technical competence and genuine agricultural understanding. The software assumes uniform soil conditions across planting zones, but if you're dealing with varied drainage patterns from your winter cover crop management, you'll need to override the automated recommendations and input manual adjustments based on your field observations. David found himself impressed not just by Rebecca's technical knowledge, but by her ability to validate the farmer's field expertise, while providing software solutions that worked with rather than against agricultural intuition. She was demonstrating exactly the kind of bridge building between technological capability and agricultural wisdom that he had described in his graduation speech 15 years earlier, but she was doing it with a natural competence that suggested years of practice and genuine understanding of both domains. As Rebecca concluded her call and turned to acknowledge David's presence, her expression shifted through a series of recognizable emotions: surprise at seeing the CEO at her desk, recognition that this visit was probably related to something specific rather than routine department interaction, and then a complex mixture of anticipation and apprehension that suggested she suspected why he might be there. "Ms. Martinez," David said gently, keeping his voice low enough that nearby colleagues wouldn't overhear the conversation, "I wonder if I could speak with you privately for a few minutes. There are some customer service innovations that I'd like to discuss, and I understand you've been contributing insights that have improved our department's effectiveness." Rebecca's hands stilled on her keyboard, and David noticed the slight tremor that suggested nervous recognition rather than complete surprise. "Of course, Mr. Chen," she replied, her voice steady despite what he sensed was significant internal tension. "Should we use one of the conference rooms?" David nodded, leading the way to a small meeting room adjacent to the customer service floor that offered privacy while remaining in Rebecca's familiar work environment. As they settled into chairs across from each other, David found himself studying the young woman who had potentially been providing strategic guidance to his company for months while maintaining complete professional invisibility. "Rebecca," David began, choosing his words carefully to acknowledge what he suspected without making assumptions that might be incorrect, "I've been reviewing some remarkable contributions to our internal feedback system, recommendations that have significantly improved customer satisfaction and demonstrated unusual insight into agricultural technology challenges. I have reason to believe these contributions might be coming from someone with your agricultural background and customer service experience. Rebecca's response was immediate and revealing not surprise or confusion, but the kind of careful evaluation that suggested she had been preparing for this conversation, even while hoping it might never be necessary. The feedback system is designed to allow anonymous contributions, she said quietly, so that improvements can be evaluated based on their merit rather than assumptions about employee credentials or backgrounds. David recognized both the intelligence and the principle behind her response, but he also heard confirmation that his investigation had led him to the right person. You're absolutely right about the value of evaluating ideas based on merit, he agreed, but I'm not here to question the appropriateness of anonymous contributions. I'm here because those contributions have been exceptional, and I'm beginning to understand that they may be coming from someone whose insights could help address challenges that extend far beyond customer service. Rebecca studied David's face with the kind of careful attention that he associated with military intelligence analysis, evaluating not just his words, but his intentions and the possible consequences of different responses. What kind of challenges? She asked, her voice carrying both curiosity and caution. David pulled the poem from his shirt pocket, unfolding it carefully and placing it on the conference table between them. Tuesday morning I found this on my desk, he said, watching Rebecca's expression for recognition or denial. It's a systematic analysis of everything that's wrong with our company's approach to agricultural technology, but it's written with agricultural understanding and strategic insight that suggests someone who has been observing our operations with both technical competence and genuine farming experience. Rebecca's eyes moved from David's face to the poem and back again, her expression shifting to something that looked like relief, mixed with apprehension. You received that message, she said softly, not quite a question but not quite a statement. Either. I received it, David confirmed, and it reminded me of why I started this company, what our original mission was supposed to accomplish, and how far we've strayed from understanding the agricultural communities we're supposed to serve. But it also made me realize that someone has been trying to help us find our way back to that mission, and that the help has been more systematic and more valuable than I had recognized. Rebecca sat quietly for a moment, clearly processing the implications of having her anonymous contributions discovered and connected to the more personal communication of the poem. I never intended for you to know the suggestions were coming from me, she finally said. I wanted the ideas to be evaluated independently, without assumptions about my background or qualifications affecting their consideration. David leaned forward slightly, his voice carrying the same gentle authority that had characterized his most effective leadership during military service. Rebecca, I need you to understand something important. The suggestions attributed to VAR in our feedback system have been among the most valuable strategic insights our company has received in months. They've improved customer satisfaction, identified fundamental problems with our product design approach, and provided solutions that demonstrate exactly the kind of agricultural understanding that we've been missing in our development process. But more than that, David continued, recognizing that this conversation required complete honesty about the company's situation and Rebecca's potential role in addressing it. I think you've been trying to help us solve problems that go far beyond individual customer service interactions. The poem you wrote wasn't just personal communication, it was strategic analysis that addresses the fundamental disconnect between our technology and the farming communities we're supposed to serve. Rebecca's expression revealed both vulnerability and determination as she began to speak more openly about her motivations and observations. When I took this job 3 years ago, I recognized your name from a graduation speech you gave at my high school. You talked about the responsibility that comes with understanding, about using the ability to bridge different worlds in service of something larger than personal success. David felt a chill of recognition as memories from that evening 15 years earlier began to crystallize around the young woman sitting across from him. Westfield High School, he said, remembering the gymnasium, the audience of rural students, and the brief conversation afterward with a thoughtful young woman who had asked questions about agricultural communications and systems thinking. "Remember," Rebecca said, her voice carrying both surprise and gratitude. "That speech changed how I thought about my agricultural background and what kind of career might allow me to use that understanding to help others. I studied agricultural communications in college, but when I saw the job posting here, I recognized an opportunity to apply the lessons you had taught about bridge building and service." The connection between his graduation speech, Rebecca's educational choices, and her subsequent decision to work at Chen Technologies revealed a continuity of purpose that David found both humbling and inspiring. "Rebecca, you took those ideas about service and understanding and developed them into exactly the kind of expertise that could address the challenges we're facing. But you've been applying that expertise while working in a position that doesn't formally recognize your capabilities or your potential contributions." Rebecca nodded, her expression thoughtful but resolved. "I chose customer service deliberately because I wanted to understand the problems from the perspective of the people who were experiencing them. I wanted to hear directly from farmers who were frustrated with technology that promised to help but actually complicated their work. I needed to understand what wasn't working before I could propose solutions that might actually serve agricultural communities." David recognized the strategic thinking behind Rebecca's approach, the same systematic understanding of operational challenges that had characterized the most effective military leaders he had served with. "The solutions you've been proposing, through the feedback system, they address problems that our development team and our management consultants have missed completely. How did you identify issues that weren't apparent to people with formal technical training and agricultural technology experience?" "Because," Rebecca replied with quiet confidence, "I've lived the challenges that your software is supposed to address. I grew up on a farm where technology promises were often disappointing, where sophisticated systems created more problems than they solved, and where the most effective tools were the ones that worked with farming intuition rather than against it. I understand what farmers need because I remember what my family needed, and I can recognize when technology serves agricultural work versus when it just serves technology companies." The depth and authenticity of Rebecca's agricultural understanding, combined with her systematic approach to identifying and addressing technological problems, revealed capabilities that David recognized as exactly what Chen Technologies needed to fulfill its original mission. But he also realized that this conversation was leading toward decisions that would affect not just Rebecca's career, but the company's entire approach to innovation and customer service. "Rebecca," David said, recognizing that he was about to ask something that would require both courage and trust from someone who had already taken significant risks to help his company, "I believe you have insights and capabilities that could help us solve challenges that extend far beyond customer service. But I also understand that you've been effective, precisely because you've been allowed to work according to your natural strengths and interests. What I'm wondering," he continued, "is whether you would be willing to help us address some of the fundamental problems that your poem and your feedback submissions have identified, but in a more direct and collaborative way than anonymous suggestions allow." Rebecca studied David's expression with the same careful attention she had given to his words throughout their conversation, evaluating an opportunity that could either validate years of quiet preparation or expose her to risks and responsibilities that might compromise the approach that had made her contributions effective. Rebecca's response came slowly, each word carefully considered, as if she were translating thoughts that had been forming for months into language that could bridge the gap between her private understanding and the professional conversation that was reshaping her relationship with both David and the company. "Mr. Chen," she began, her voice carrying new steadiness that suggested a decision had crystallized during their conversation. "I've been watching this company struggle with challenges that I recognized from the first week I started working here. Not just technical problems or customer service issues, but fundamental misunderstandings about what farmers actually need from technology." David leaned back in his chair, recognizing that Rebecca was preparing to share insights that went far beyond anything she had communicated through anonymous feedback submissions. The conference room seemed to grow quieter, as if the building itself were making space for revelations that might reshape everything he thought he understood about his company's mission and capabilities. "When I listened to customer calls during my first months here," Rebecca continued, "I heard the same frustrations my grandfather expressed about agricultural technology throughout my childhood. Sophisticated systems that promised efficiency, but required so much learning and maintenance that they actually increased workload. Software designed by people who understood programming but had never spent a harvest season managing the kind of variables that can't be controlled through better interfaces or more powerful processors." Rebecca paused, gathering her thoughts, before continuing with observations that revealed the depth of her analysis and the personal investment that had driven her anonymous contributions. "But what troubled me most was recognizing that this company was founded by someone who should have understood these problems. Your graduation speech 15 years ago demonstrated exactly the kind of bridge thinking that could address the disconnect between agricultural reality and technological possibility. You understood that effective innovation requires translating between different kinds of expertise, respecting the wisdom that comes from experience, while applying systematic thinking to complex challenges." David felt the weight of recognition and responsibility as Rebecca articulated insights that cut straight to the heart of how his company had lost its way. "You're saying that we've forgotten our original mission," he said, acknowledging what he had begun to suspect, but hadn't been able to articulate with such clarity. "I'm saying that the company has developed in ways that contradict the principles you described in that graduation speech," Rebecca replied, her voice carrying both compassion and directness. "Instead of creating technology that works with agricultural intuition, we've created systems that require farmers to think like programmers. Instead of respecting the complexity of farming decisions, we've tried to reduce agricultural management to algorithmic processes. Instead of building bridges between technological capability and farming wisdom, we've created products that assume technology should replace traditional knowledge rather than enhance it." The systematic nature of Rebecca's analysis, combined with her ability to connect current operational problems to fundamental philosophical issues, revealed strategic thinking that David recognized as exactly what the company needed to address its crisis. But he also understood that Rebecca's insights were valuable precisely because they came from someone who had maintained connection to agricultural realities while developing technological competence. "Rebecca," David said, recognizing that this conversation was moving toward territory that would require both vulnerability and strategic planning. "The board of directors is meeting tomorrow morning to discuss the company's future. The financial situation is serious enough that they're considering fundamental changes to our leadership and our business model. What you're describing, the disconnect between our technology and agricultural needs, it's not just a design problem. It's an existential threat to everything we've tried to build." Rebecca's expression shifted to something that combined concern with determination, as if she had been preparing for exactly this kind of crisis, even while hoping it might be avoided. "I know about the board meeting," she said quietly. "Customer service receives calls from farmers who are considering switching to competitor products, and we also hear from agricultural consultants who work with multiple technology providers. The feedback suggests that Chen Technologies has developed a reputation for sophisticated products that don't actually improve farming operations." The directness of Rebecca's assessment was sobering, But David found himself grateful for analysis. That didn't soften difficult realities or offer false reassurance. "What would you recommend?" he asked, recognizing that he was essentially asking a customer service representative to provide strategic guidance that his management team and external consultants had been unable to deliver. Rebecca was quiet for several moments, clearly organizing thoughts that had been developing through months of observation and analysis. When she spoke, her words carried the kind of systematic clarity that David associated with the most effective military briefings he had received during complex operations. "The fundamental problem isn't technical," Rebecca began. "It's philosophical. The company is trying to solve agricultural challenges through technological sophistication rather than technological appropriateness. We're building systems that impress other technology companies rather than systems that serve farming families. Every design decision reflects urban assumptions about efficiency, standardization, and optimization that don't match the reality of agricultural work." David found himself taking notes as Rebecca continued, recognizing that her analysis was providing exactly the kind of diagnostic clarity that had been missing from previous attempts to understand the company's problems. "Can you give me specific examples of how this philosophical misunderstanding translates into practical problems?" "The irrigation management module assumes that farmers want to optimize water usage through algorithmic precision," Rebecca replied. "But farmers need irrigation systems that can adapt to soil conditions, weather changes, and crop responses that vary across individual fields. The software treats irrigation like manufacturing process control instead of agricultural decision-making that requires constant human judgment and environmental awareness." Rebecca's examples demonstrated not just technical understanding, but intimate knowledge of how farming actually functioned versus how technology companies assumed it functioned. "The crop rotation planning feature tries to maximize theoretical yield optimization," she continued, "but farmers choose crop rotations based on soil health, market conditions, equipment capabilities, and family labor availability variables. That can't be reduced to optimization algorithms because they require understanding relationships between systems rather than just manipulating individual variables." David recognized that Rebecca's analysis was revealing problems that went far beyond individual software features to fundamental assumptions about the nature of agricultural work and the role that technology should play in supporting it. "What you're describing suggests that our entire product development approach needs to change," he said, beginning to understand the scope of transformation that would be required to address these philosophical problems. "It suggests that the company needs to remember what you understood 15 years ago," Rebecca replied, her voice carrying both challenge and encouragement. "That the most effective technology serves human expertise rather than replacing it. That innovation means creating tools that enhance agricultural intuition rather than systems that require farmers to think like computers. That successful products emerge from understanding the real-world context where they'll be used rather than from technological possibilities that ignore practical constraints." The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on the conference room door, followed by Tommy Chun's appearance with an expression that suggested urgent information that couldn't wait for scheduled meetings. "David, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we've received some communication from the board that affects tomorrow's meeting." David gestured for Tommy to join the conversation, recognizing that the crisis they were discussing was about to become more immediate and public. "What kind of communication?" Tommy glanced at Rebecca, clearly uncertain about discussing board-level information in front of a customer service employee, but David nodded for him to continue. "Dr. Patricia Williams called to inform us that they've been contacted by Midwest Agricultural Solutions," Tommy said, referring to Chen Technologies' largest competitor. "Apparently Mays is interested in acquiring our customer base and our agricultural database, but they're not interested in our current product line or our development team." The implications of this information sent a chill through David's understanding of the company's situation. A competitor's interest in acquiring customers, but not products, confirmed that the market viewed Chen Technologies' technological approach as fundamentally flawed rather than simply needing refinement or better marketing. "There's more," Tommy continued, his expression growing more serious. Dr. Williams also mentioned that several board members have been approached by agricultural technology firms about potential consulting arrangements. They're being offered positions that would begin after Chen Technologies either restructures or dissolves. David felt the weight of approaching crisis settling around the conversation, like a storm system that had been building on the horizon, but was now moving directly overhead. The board members were preparing for the company's failure and positioning themselves for opportunities that would emerge from its dissolution. "How much time do we have?" David asked, recognizing that the timeline for addressing the company's problems had just shortened dramatically. "The board meeting is scheduled for 9 o'clock tomorrow morning," Tommy replied. But Dr. Williams suggested that we should be prepared for a comprehensive discussion of all options, including immediate sale of assets and termination of current operations. Rebecca had been listening to this exchange with the kind of focused attention that David recognized in people who were processing information that would require immediate strategic response. "Mr. Chen," she said, her voice carrying new urgency, "if the board is considering dissolving the company rather than addressing the fundamental problems with product approach, then tomorrow's meeting isn't just about financial performance. It's about whether Chen Technologies will continue to exist as an organization committed to serving agricultural communities." David recognized that Rebecca was right. The board meeting would determine not just his future as CEO, but whether the company's original mission would survive in any form. "Rebecca, I know I'm asking something unusual, but would you be willing to help us prepare for tomorrow's meeting? Your analysis of the company's problems and your understanding of what agricultural customers actually need, that might be exactly what we need to demonstrate that the company can be saved if we're willing to make fundamental changes." Rebecca's response revealed both the courage and the commitment that had driven her anonymous contributions for months. "Mr. Chen, I've been preparing for this conversation for 3 years. Not just the analysis of what's wrong, but ideas about what could be different if the company were willing to rebuild its approach around agricultural understanding rather than technological sophistication. What would that look like?" David asked, recognizing that he was essentially asking Rebecca to provide the strategic vision that could save the company. Rebecca straightened in her chair, her demeanor shifting to something that combined professional competence with personal investment in the company's mission. "It would look like technology designed by people who understand farming from the inside out. Products that enhance agricultural decision-making rather than replacing it. Development processes that include farmers as partners rather than consumers. And leadership that recognizes agricultural expertise as the foundation for innovation rather than something that technology should overcome." David understood that Rebecca was describing not just product changes, but organizational transformation that would require convincing the board that fundamental change was both necessary and possible. Tomorrow's meeting would determine whether Chen Technologies could evolve into the kind of company Rebecca envisioned or whether its original mission would die with its current approach. "Rebecca," David said, making a decision that would either save the company or accelerate its demise, "I'd like you to present your analysis and recommendations to the board tomorrow morning. Not as a customer service representative, but as someone who understands both the problems we're facing and the solutions that could address them." Rebecca's acceptance of this challenge would set in motion events that would test everything both of them believed about agricultural technology, organizational change, and the possibility of building business success around values that honored both innovation and tradition. Friday morning arrived with the kind of gray overcast sky that seemed to press down on the Chen Technologies building, creating an atmosphere that matched the weight of decisions that would determine the company's survival. David had barely slept, his mind cycling between the analysis Rebecca had provided and the recognition that he was about to stake his professional future on insights from someone the board had never heard of, whose agricultural expertise they might dismiss, and whose recommendations would challenge every assumption that had guided the company's development for the past 5 years. The boardroom on the 35th floor had been arranged with the formal precision that characterized meetings where fundamental decisions would be made. Dr. Patricia Williams sat at the head of the polished conference table, flanked by James Chen and Robert Martinez, the 3 voting members whose collective decision would determine whether Chen Technologies continued under David's leadership, restructured under new management, or dissolved entirely. The morning light filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows illuminated financial reports, market analysis documents, and legal paperwork that painted a comprehensive picture of corporate failure. David entered the boardroom at precisely 8:50, accompanied by Rebecca, whose presence immediately shifted the dynamics of what the board members had expected to be a straightforward discussion of financial restructuring and leadership changes. Rebecca carried herself with quiet confidence, dressed in professional attire that honored the formality of the meeting while maintaining the understated competence that characterized her approach to all workplace interactions. "David," Dr. Williams began, her tone carrying the careful neutrality that experienced board members used when delivering difficult decisions. "We've reviewed the quarterly reports, the customer retention data, and the market analysis that Tommy provided yesterday evening. We've also had preliminary discussions with Midwest Agricultural Solutions about their interest in acquiring Chen Technologies' customer base and agricultural databases. The mention of asset acquisition rather than company sale confirmed David's understanding that the board was prepared to dissolve the company rather than continue supporting operations that had consistently failed to meet financial projections. "Dr. Williams, before we discuss sale of assets, I'd like to present an analysis that addresses the fundamental reasons for our market performance and outlines changes that could restore both profitability and mission effectiveness." James Chen glanced at his tablet, reviewing notes that suggested he had already reached conclusions about the company's viability. "David, we appreciate your commitment to the company's original mission, but the financial data indicate systematic problems that extend beyond management strategies or product refinements. We're facing market rejection of our core products, not temporary performance issues that can be addressed through incremental improvements." David recognized the board's skepticism as both reasonable and potentially insurmountable, given the evidence of failure that surrounded their discussion. "James, you're absolutely right about systematic problems, but I believe we've been misdiagnosing the nature of those problems, and therefore missing solutions that could address them effectively." Dr. Williams studied Rebecca with the kind of analytical attention that suggested both curiosity and caution about her presence in a board-level discussion. "David, you've brought someone to join our meeting who wasn't on the agenda. Could you explain Ms. Martinez's role in the analysis you'd like to present?" David felt the weight of a decision that would either validate months of investigation and preparation or confirm the board's suspicions that his leadership had become disconnected from practical business realities. "Dr. Williams, Rebecca Martinez, has been conducting systematic analysis of our customer interactions, product performance, and market positioning for the past 18 months. Her insights have identified fundamental problems with our approach to agricultural technology that explain why sophisticated products have consistently failed to serve their intended markets." Robert Martinez leaned forward, his expression skeptical but not dismissive. "David, customer service analysis is valuable for operational improvements, but strategic business decisions require market research and competitive analysis that goes beyond individual customer interactions. Rebecca spoke for the first time. Since entering the boardroom, her voice carrying the kind of calm authority that David recognized from military briefings where junior officers provided crucial intelligence to senior leadership. Mr. Martinez, with respect, the customer service data reveals systematic patterns that market research has missed because it's been conducted by people who understand business metrics but not agricultural operations. The directness of Rebecca's response shifted the board's attention from polite acknowledgement of her presence to genuine evaluation of what she might contribute to their understanding of the company's problems. Dr. Williams gestured for Rebecca to continue, her expression indicating both professional courtesy and growing curiosity. The fundamental issue, Rebecca continued, isn't that our products lack technological sophistication or that our marketing doesn't reach the right audiences. The problem is that we've created agricultural technology based on urban assumptions about efficiency, standardization, and optimization that contradict how farming actually works. Rebecca opened a folder containing documentation that she had spent the previous evening organizing into a presentation that would translate months of customer service observations into language that would resonate with board-level strategic thinking. Every customer complaint we receive falls into predictable categories that reveal the same underlying problem. Our software treats farming like manufacturing rather than recognizing it as complex decision-making that requires adaptation to variables that can't be controlled or standardized. James Chun studied the documentation Rebecca had provided, his expression shifting from skepticism toward recognition that her analysis addressed questions that previous consulted reports had failed to answer. Ms. Martinez, can you provide specific examples of how these philosophical differences translate into practical market problems? Rebecca's response demonstrated the systematic thinking that had impressed David throughout their previous conversations, but now applied to board-level strategic concerns rather than individual customer issues. Our irrigation management system assumes farmers want algorithmic optimization of water usage, but farmers need tools that adapt to soil variations, weather unpredictability, and crop responses that change based on local conditions that can't be reduced to data inputs. The crop planning module tries to maximize theoretical yields through mathematical modeling. Rebecca continued, but farmers make planting decisions based on equipment capabilities, labor availability, soil health considerations, and market timing that require human judgment rather than automated recommendations. Dr. Williams interrupted with a question that revealed both engagement and continued skepticism about Rebecca's authority to provide strategic analysis. Ms. Martinez, your observations about product design are interesting, but how do you account for the fact that our development team includes agricultural engineers and that our market research has been conducted by firms with extensive agricultural technology experience? Rebecca's response addressed the board's concerns while challenging assumptions that had guided the company's approach to product development and market understanding. Dr. Williams, agricultural engineers and market research firms typically understand farming from academic or statistical perspectives, but they rarely have lived experience with the daily decision-making that farming requires. There's a difference between studying agricultural systems and understanding how farmers actually think, prioritize, and adapt to changing conditions. Robert Martinez studied financial projections while listening to Rebecca's analysis clearly, attempting to connect her observations about product design philosophy to concrete business outcomes. Ms. Martinez, assuming your analysis of product-market misalignment is correct, what would you recommend as solutions that could address these fundamental problems? Rebecca glanced at David, recognizing that her answer would determine whether the board viewed her insights as valuable strategic input or interesting observations that didn't translate into actionable business solutions. Mr. Martinez, the solutions require changing how we approach product development, not just improving existing products. Instead of designing technology for farmers, We need to design technology with farmers as active participants in the development process. What that means practically, Rebecca continued, is creating advisory relationships with working farms where we can test prototypes in real agricultural environments, receive feedback from people who understand operational constraints, and refine products based on how they actually perform under the kind of variable conditions that farming involves. Dr. Williams leaned back in her chair, clearly processing information that challenged her understanding of both the company's problems and potential solutions. Ms. Martinez, what you're describing sounds like fundamental changes to our development methodology and our relationship with agricultural customers. How would these changes address the financial crisis that threatens the company's immediate survival? Rebecca's answer revealed strategic thinking that connected philosophical changes to practical business outcomes in ways that demonstrated both agricultural understanding and business competence. Dr. Williams, the financial crisis reflects market rejection of products that don't serve agricultural needs effectively. Farmers are switching to competitors not because our technology is inferior, but because competitors understand farming better and create products that work with agricultural decision-making rather than against it. If we rebuilt our approach around agricultural partnership rather than technological sophistication, Rebecca continued, we could create products that farmers actually want to use, recommend to other farmers, and integrate into their operations in ways that improve rather than complicate their work. That kind of market response would restore both revenue and reputation. The boardroom fell silent as the three board members processed Rebecca's analysis and recommendations, clearly weighing her insights against their previous understanding of the company's problems and their predetermined solutions for addressing financial crisis. David recognized that this moment would determine whether months of investigation and preparation would influence the company's future, or whether the board would proceed with asset liquidation. James Chun broke the silence with a question that revealed both skepticism and growing recognition that Rebecca's analysis might explain problems that previous strategic reviews had failed to address. Ms. Martinez, your recommendations would require significant investment in new development processes and customer relationship approaches. Given our current financial situation, how would we fund these changes while maintaining operations? Rebecca's response demonstrated both practical understanding of business constraints and creative thinking about how philosophical changes could address financial limitations. Mr. Chun, the development approach I'm describing would actually reduce costs while improving product effectiveness. Instead of expensive internal research and development that produces products farmers don't want, we would be developing solutions in partnership with farmers who would provide testing environments, feedback, and market validation. But more importantly, Rebecca continued, we have existing customers who have been providing feedback through customer service interactions for months. We already know what problems need to be solved and what approaches would address them effectively. The changes would require reorganizing existing resources rather than acquiring new capabilities. Dr. Williams studied Rebecca with the kind of analytical attention that suggested serious evaluation of proposals that had initially seemed outside her expectations for the meeting. Ms. Martinez, assuming the board were willing to consider the approach you're describing, what would implementation look like? How would we transition from current operations to the agricultural partnership model you've outlined? Rebecca's answer revealed preparation that extended far beyond the analysis she had presented, suggesting months of thinking about practical implementation of ideas that had emerged from her customer service observations. Dr. Williams' implementation would begin with identifying existing customers who have provided the most valuable feedback and inviting them to participate in formal advisory relationships. We would redesign our most problematic software modules based on their input, test the improvements in their actual farming operations, and use their success stories to demonstrate market viability to other potential customers. David realized That Rebecca was describing transformation that would either save the company by reconnecting it with its original mission, or provide clear evidence that agricultural technology approaches they were advocating couldn't generate sustainable business results. Either outcome would be preferable to dissolution based on failure to address problems that might have practical solutions. Dr. Williams, David said, recognizing that the board needed to make decisions based on concrete proposals rather than philosophical discussions, I'd like to request 60 days to implement the approach Rebecca has outlined. If customer satisfaction and retention don't improve significantly during that period, I'll support whatever restructuring decisions the board considers necessary. The request for 60 days rather than immediate dissolution represented exactly the kind of strategic risk that would test whether Rebecca's insights could translate into business results that validated her analysis of the company's problems and potential solutions. That Dr. Williams exchanged glances with her fellow board members. The kind of silent communication that David recognized from military leadership situations where crucial decisions required balancing calculated risks against potential catastrophic losses. The boardroom remained quiet except for the distant hum of office activity and the occasional sound of traffic 35 floors below, creating a suspended moment where months of analysis and years of company development would either culminate in transformation or dissolution. David, Dr. Williams said finally, her voice carrying the measured tone of someone who had spent decades making decisions that affected both organizations and individual careers. What Ms. Martinez has presented challenges fundamental assumptions that have guided our investment in Chen Technologies. The agricultural partnership approach she's describing would represent complete philosophical realignment rather than strategic adjustment. James Chun opened his tablet and began reviewing financial projections that had been prepared assuming asset liquidation rather than operational restructuring. The 60-day timeline you're proposing would require continued operational funding during a period when we're already operating at significant monthly losses. The board would need to see evidence of immediate market response to justify continued investment in an approach that contradicts our previous strategic direction. Rebecca leaned forward slightly, her demeanor shifting to something that combined professional respect with personal conviction. Mr. Chun, the market response would be immediate because we already have customers who are ready to participate in the development process I've described. They've been telling us what they need through customer service interactions, but we haven't been treating their feedback as strategic input for product development. Robert Martinez studied Rebecca with the kind of analytical attention that suggested genuine evaluation of her proposals rather than polite acknowledgement of unconventional ideas. Ms. Martinez, you're suggesting that existing customers would be willing to invest time and resources in helping us redesign products that have previously frustrated them. What evidence do you have that farmers would participate in this kind of collaborative development process? Rebecca's response revealed preparation that extended far beyond theoretical proposals to practical understanding of agricultural community dynamics and farmer motivations for supporting technology development. Mr. Martinez, farmers participate enthusiastically in development processes when they believe their input will actually influence product design rather than just providing market research data that disappears into corporate decision-making they can't influence. Over the past 3 years, Rebecca continued, I've spoken with hundreds of farmers who have expressed frustration, not just with our products, but with agricultural technology development in general. The most common complaint isn't that technology is too sophisticated, but that it's designed by people who don't understand farming and implemented by companies that don't listen to agricultural feedback. Dr. Williams interrupted with a question that revealed both strategic thinking and continued skepticism about whether Rebecca's customer service observations translated into actionable business intelligence. Ms. Martinez, assuming farmer willingness To participate in collaborative development, how would we measure success during the 60-day period David is requesting? What metrics would demonstrate that this approach can generate sustainable business results? Rebecca glanced at David, recognizing that her answer would determine whether the board viewed her recommendations as measurable business proposals or interesting ideas that couldn't be evaluated using standard performance indicators. Dr. Williams: success would be measured through customer retention rates, product usage statistics, and most importantly, farmer referrals to other potential customers. Agricultural communities are relationship-based, so product success spreads through word-of-mouth recommendations from farmers who trust each other's operational judgment. But the most immediate indicator, Rebecca continued, would be reduced customer service call volume and increased customer satisfaction scores. When agricultural technology works with farming practices rather than against them, farmers require less technical support and express higher satisfaction with their software investments. James Chun looked up from his financial analysis clearly, attempting to connect Rebecca's proposed metrics to concrete business outcomes that would justify continued operational investment. Ms. Martinez, reduced support costs and increased satisfaction are valuable operational improvements, but the company needs revenue growth and market expansion to address our financial situation. How would the collaborative development approach you're describing generate new customer acquisition? Rebecca's answer demonstrated understanding of agricultural market dynamics that went beyond customer service observations to strategic thinking about business development in rural communities. Mr. Chun, agricultural technology adoption follows different patterns than urban consumer markets. Farmers make technology decisions based on recommendations from other farmers whose operations they understand and whose judgment they trust. One successful implementation in a farming community often generates multiple additional customers who adopt technology because they've seen it work effectively for operations similar to their own. David recognized that Rebecca was describing market development approaches that aligned with both agricultural community dynamics and the military principle that the most effective strategies work with, rather than against, environmental characteristics. James, what Rebecca is describing matches patterns we observed during my military consulting work with agricultural communities. Farmers adopt innovations that prove themselves in local conditions rather than responding to marketing campaigns or technical specifications. Dr. Williams studied financial projections while listening to the conversation, clearly weighing potential benefits of Rebecca's approach against the risks of continued investment in a company that had already failed to meet performance expectations. David, the approach Ms. Martinez is describing sounds promising in theory, but implementation would require restructuring our entire development process, changing our customer relationship model, and investing in community-based market development during a period when we can barely maintain current operations. Rebecca's response addressed the board's concerns about implementation costs, while demonstrating practical understanding of how organizational change could be managed within existing resource constraints. Dr. Williams, the restructuring I'm describing would actually reduce development costs because we'd be solving problems that farmers have already identified, rather than developing features that engineers think might be valuable. We'd be testing solutions in real agricultural environments, rather than expensive laboratory conditions that don't match farming realities. The customer relationship changes would build on connections we already have, Rebecca continued, rather than requiring new market research or customer acquisition campaigns. And the community-based development would be conducted by existing staff, who would be applying their technical skills to agricultural challenges that have been clearly defined through customer feedback. Robert Martinez leaned back in his chair, his expression suggesting serious consideration of proposals that had initially seemed outside the scope of practical business solutions. Ms. Martinez, assuming the board approves David's 60-day implementation period, what would be your role in managing this transition? Your customer service position wouldn't provide the authority or resources necessary to coordinate the kind of organizational changes you're describing. David understood that Robert's question was essentially asking whether Rebecca would be willing to accept responsibility for implementing ideas that would either save the company or provide clear evidence of their impracticality. Robert, I'd like to propose that Rebecca be appointed as Director of Agricultural Development, a position that would give her authority to coordinate between customer service, product development, and agricultural partnerships. Rebecca's acceptance of this responsibility would require both professional risk and personal commitment that extended far beyond her previous customer service role. Mr. Martinez, I would be honored to accept that responsibility. But I want to be clear that success would depend on the entire organization embracing agricultural partnership as a fundamental business principle rather than just a customer relations strategy. Dr. Williams closed her financial analysis and looked directly at David, her expression indicating that the board was approaching a decision point that would determine the company's immediate future. David, what you and Ms. Martinez are proposing represents significant organizational risk during a financial crisis. If the agricultural partnership approach doesn't generate measurable improvement within 60 days, Chen Technologies would face dissolution under conditions that might be worse than our current situation. David recognized that Dr. Williams was offering him an opportunity to withdraw his proposal and accept asset liquidation as a safer alternative to betting the company's survival on approaches that challenged conventional business wisdom. Dr. Williams, I understand the risks, but I also believe that Rebecca's analysis explains why conventional approaches have failed, and why continued investment in those approaches would guarantee failure regardless of leadership changes or operational adjustments. Ms. Martinez, Dr. Rodriguez began, I've been hearing remarkable things about the agricultural partnership approach that Chen Technologies has been implementing. Word travels quickly through agricultural research communities when someone develops technology that actually improves farming operations rather than just impressing other technologists. Rebecca felt her pulse quicken as she recognized that their work was gaining attention beyond their immediate customer base. Dr. Rodriguez, thank you for your interest. We've been fortunate to work with farming partners who have been generous with their expertise and patient with our learning process. Ms. Martinez, I'm calling because the Agricultural Research Service is launching a new initiative to support technology development that emerges from authentic farmer-researcher partnerships. We're looking for companies that understand agricultural innovation as community-based problem-solving rather than laboratory research that gets imposed on farming operations. The conversation that followed revealed opportunities that extended far beyond Chen Technologies' immediate business concerns to possibilities for influencing how agricultural technology development was approached across the entire industry. Dr. Rodriguez described federal funding opportunities, research partnerships, and policy initiatives that were designed to support exactly the kind of work that Rebecca and David had been pioneering. What's particularly interesting about your approach, Dr. Rodriguez continued, is that you've demonstrated that agricultural technology can be both more effective and more affordable when it's developed in partnership with the people who actually use it. That combination of improved performance and reduced cost challenges assumptions that have guided agricultural technology policy for decades. The second board meeting took place in the same 35th floor conference room, but the atmosphere had been transformed completely. Instead of financial projections showing decline and dissolution plans, the table was covered with success stories, customer testimonials, and partnership proposals that painted a picture of transformation that exceeded everyone's expectations. Dr. Patricia Williams opened the meeting with acknowledgement that surprised even David. 60 days ago, we were prepared to dissolve Chen Technologies because conventional approaches to agricultural technology had consistently failed to generate sustainable business results. Today, we're discussing expansion opportunities and partnership possibilities that could position this company as a leader in community-based agricultural innovation. The financial report that Tommy Chen presented showed transformation that validated everything Rebecca had argued during the crisis meeting. 2 months earlier, revenue had increased by 23%, operational costs had decreased by 18%, and customer retention had reached 94%, the highest in the company's history. But the most significant change wasn't reflected in financial metrics. Chen Technologies had received inquiries from agricultural communities across the Midwest asking about partnership opportunities, technology demonstrations, and collaborative development projects. The company that had been hemorrhaging customers 60 days earlier was now receiving more interest than they could accommodate with existing resources. Rebecca, James Chen said, studying reports that showed systematic transformation across every business metric. What you described as agricultural partnership has proven to be not just effective technology development, but superior business strategy. The question now is how we scale these approaches to serve the broader agricultural technology market. Rebecca's response revealed both strategic thinking and deep commitment to maintaining the values that had made their transformation successful. Mr. Chen, scaling means staying true to the principles that have worked rather than reverting to conventional business approaches that feel more familiar but have consistently failed. Growth has to happen at the pace that allows us to maintain authentic partnerships rather than rushing to expand in ways that compromise our agricultural relationships. As our story concludes with David and Rebecca standing in the Chen Technologies lobby, surrounded by photographs from partner farms and testimonials from farmers whose operations had been transformed through collaborative technology development. We want to extend an invitation to you, our viewers, who understand that the most powerful innovations emerge from authentic partnerships between technology and agricultural wisdom. The transformation of Chen Technologies wasn't just a business success story, it was proof that when we listen carefully to farming communities, respect agricultural expertise, and design technology that serves rather than replaces human knowledge, we can create solutions that benefit everyone involved. If you're a farmer who has struggled with technology that promised help but delivered complication, if you're a technologist who wants to create innovations that truly serve agricultural communities, or if you're simply someone who believes that the best solutions emerge from authentic collaboration between different kinds of expertise, we want to hear from you. Subscribe to our channel to follow more stories about agricultural innovation, community-based problem solving, and the remarkable things that happen when people with different backgrounds come together to address challenges that matter. Share your own agricultural technology experiences in the comments below. Have you encountered software that enhanced your farming operations or complicated them? Have you participated in technology development that valued your agricultural expertise? What innovations would you most like to see emerge from authentic farmer-technologist partnerships? Hit the notification bell to stay updated on new stories about agricultural innovation, rural entrepreneurship, and the ongoing evolution of farming technology that serves agricultural communities rather than just impressing other technologists. Remember, the most profound changes often begin with quiet observations, careful analysis, and the courage to challenge conventional approaches that aren't serving the people they're supposed to help. Rebecca Martinez's poem that saved a company started with years of listening to farmers who knew exactly what they needed. They just needed technologists who were willing to listen and learn. Your agricultural insights matter. Your farming experiences matter. Your ideas for better technology matter. Subscribe today, and let's continue exploring how authentic partnerships between agricultural wisdom and technological innovation can create solutions that serve farming communities, honor traditional knowledge, and build sustainable success for everyone involved. The seeds of change that Rebecca, planted with a single poem, have grown into transformations that extend far beyond one company's survival. What agricultural innovations will your insights help create? Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story about the remarkable things that happen when agricultural communities and technology development work together as true partners.